Thank you, Bill, and nice to follow Robin, my fellow CEO from Alberta. I'm from BCNet, which is the advanced regional network in BC for research and higher education. It's one of the Canary regionals. The last two talks, actually Bill's comment about the highway and digital infrastructure, that's the entire theme of my talk today. We have Metro Vancouver. We want to build Metro Vancouver's digital infrastructure into the next generation city infrastructure. The theme of the talk today is not BCNet, it's not Canary, it's not necessarily advanced networks. It's how do we take our 50-year-old cable TV infrastructure, 100-year-old plus twisted pair infrastructure that was put in for telephone a while ago, not have 5 companies dig up the street each time we put in fiber optic cable to replace these things. So what's the approach? How do we do it? My thesis is that we need a hybrid model approach to digital infrastructure to enable the intelligent community. I think we're short of models. So I'm going to propose one today, show you how we're going to try to do it in Metro Vancouver, and hopefully get a little discussion going. I'd like to talk a little bit about the components of digital infrastructure, how BCNet and the universities might use this thing in Metro Vancouver, and finally what our next steps are. Slide. So what do we need for digital infrastructure? We need networks and services over top. Next slide. What are the networks? We need cabling, we need aggregation points, and we need exchange points. I'm going to explain what an exchange point is in a little bit. But over top of that basic infrastructure, which, by the way, we don't have, we have a little bit of cabling, we have no aggregation points to speak of, and nobody knows what exchange points are really. So I'm going to explain that yet. But we want to layer services such as inter-exchange carriers, internet service providers, and data centers. We want to get those cloud services integrated into this network. Slide. What's local cabling? It's that last mile piece like the roads or the subway system, whatever. Slide. Aggregation points. You got to walk to the bus stop to get to that aggregation point to get on the bus. You take your letter and take it to the mailbox. That's an aggregation point, right? So where the cables come together, you've got to have all the local cables come together to a wire center or an aggregation point or a shared wireless tower. So that's the first thing you need. Once you have those aggregation points, you have to bring them together into some sort of exchange point. The exchange point is where the services and the interconnect happens. Now, the analogies there, or metaphors actually, there would be a stock exchange is the exact same thing. We have pieces of paper called stocks, right, or pieces of companies that are traded. People have to get there. There's brokerages, there's bids, etc. The exchange point is where the trading actually happens. If you can think about it, the wealth is to a certain extent created. We have airports, we have shopping malls, train stations. Those are exchange points. So think of all the other analogies with road systems or airlines for airports. We have ways to get people to an aggregation point, an exchange point where the services are cross-connected, and then the exchange points are actually interconnected on a larger basis. So infrastructure ownership. Who owns this stuff? For our basic infrastructure, we have sewer and water. That's actually a very complex system, but it's all owned by one municipality, or actually a set of municipalities that goes back to, if you can think of the services being the settling ponds, etc., not a particularly sexy analogy, but the services for the sewer and water, right, water treatment plants, are actually owned on a regional basis. Natural gas, we have the natural gas suppliers that come into a common pipeline, right, that then is redistributed. Electricity, the same thing. Roads you all know about. So we've got, let's just take a summary of the ownership. In most cases, for these base infrastructures, we have government-owned base pieces. So for sewer, water, natural gas, electricity, and roads, it's either a regulated utility or the government. The service layer, and that's where I'm talking about the water treatment plant, the actual water that comes from somewhere is the service. Natural gas is the natural gas that comes out of the ground. There are various suppliers of that, so it's mixed. It's not just a single company. We're trying to move to a model where the end user can pick that supply and actually have it billed. Same thing for electricity. We have multiple supplies on the outside for electricity. We could even have a market for that where individuals choose those particular types. Finally, roads. The cities provide the roads, but they don't provide the automobiles, right? So the service layer is over top. So most strategic infrastructure is a mix of local commons, so there's common-owned things underneath, and a market layer over top. Just about everything in our society has got that mixed model. Well, why not telecommunications? Why not? There's three possibilities for digital infrastructure. So we could have the old monopoly scheme, we could have a mixed model, or a complete market thing, facilities-based competition. That's the example where Robin showed, where everybody puts in their own cable, and we dig up the roads infinite number of times if we have infinite competition. Next slide. What are some of the advantages of a mixed model? Well, we can hopefully get both the lack of duplication, make it efficient and ubiquitous. That's the monopoly method. In other words, fascism makes the trains run on time, I suppose, is the monopoly metaphor here. However, in markets, we have efficient pricing, it's responsive, we have ways to fund it, we have basically capital inflows, all those things manage to happen. So the disadvantages, monopolies are slow to innovate. For example, you couldn't put a modem on the telephone system in the 1970s. It was illegal, right? So that's the lack of innovation. There's biases by usage. You have to force people to purchase it. If you have a complete market system, there's segmentation. It's not universal. It's wherever you can make the money. That's where the cable and the service is going to go. So what's the problem with a mixed model? Well, if we have this kind of base level commons and upper layer market, how do we put all these services together, make sure that they hand off correctly? How's the coordination done? It's a problem. Nobody's solved it. Okay? You entrepreneurs out there, let's figure it out, right? It hasn't been really put into place yet. It's unsolved. Next slide. So I'm going to posit that we should choose the mixed model rather than status quo. So what parts do we need, and what parts are common, and what parts are market? Next slide. So I'm going to posit that the network parts, the local cable and the conduit, is the commons. Notice how I'm not saying government-owned, I'm saying it's common-owned. That could be a third party that's licensed or whatever. I'm not quite sure what the model should be there. I'm not sure we really understand that yet. But I'm positing that the local cable and conduit is a common piece. The aggregation point, that could be mixed. It could be a third party, it could be multiple third parties. I think that's yet to be known, but let's assume that would be to start some sort of common area as well. The exchange point, just like you can have multiple stock exchanges, it's possible that you could have multiple private exchange points in this particular model. Just think of it in terms of shopping malls. There's not a legislated shopping mall that's a commons thing. It's zoned, possibly, but there's multiple shopping malls that can be thought of as exchange points. The counter to that might be airports or train stations, although even then you have multiple train stations for exchanges. So in terms of intercity and exchange cable, let's let the private sector do that, although there could be some argument on that. And certainly on the service layer, we don't want anybody at the regulated level to be in the service business, right? We want the innovation to happen there. Next slide. So here's an architecture. So you have local cable plant, aggregation point, and some blue lines that connect those together. Those would be your commons, maybe government-owned. Service exchange points, again, that could be third party. It could even be private sector. Wireless towers, we could argue those things are currently basically market-based, private sector. Again, there's some debate over whether you could have shared wireless towers to make this happen too. Next slide. Exchange points. How many do you need per region? It's kind of asking the question, how many shopping malls do you need per region, or how many airports do you need per region? I think that's unknown. That's maybe a logistics problem. right, in order to solve? I'm just asking the question. The ownership of these exchange points, is it a regional entity? Is it market-based? I think that's unknown. Next slide. End-to-end service, here's the nice thing. If this base level is there, the cabling, the conduit, the exchange points, aggregation points, then the creativity can happen at the Internet service provider layer. This is just what happened with the dawn of the Internet circa the 1970s. Little ISPs could Velcro modems to their walls, buy T1s, the common telecommunications infrastructure, and they put up Internet services that really we didn't even know what we wanted in those days. And it became infinitely successful, mainly because there are bunches of ISPs innovating. So how do we get that back where innovative services can be put over base layer infrastructure? Again, I don't think we have that at the moment. The problem is when we have all these cabling infrastructures and exchange points, how do we order the cable end-to-end? How do we fulfill all that? There's probably some need for a third party or regional entity. Next slide. The nice thing is that once we have this base infrastructure with local cabling and exchange points, now we can talk about data centers and XaaS and content delivery networks and how they're interconnected. In fact, the data center owners can figure out where they might optimally place those things, right, if we actually had the cable infrastructure laid out and it was open-ended. But again, we don't have any plans or any way to integrate this right now. So it's really pretty sad. Next slide. So why do we care? Well, we need fiber for research and education. We need fat pipes. We need to get to the Internet. Universities are small cities. They're one of the largest Internet users, all those students with their laptops, iPads, etc. So we need to get to not only to the Internet, but advanced networks. So we need these things. We need exchange points. We need to connect to multiple things. Next slide. So we've actually pioneered exchange points in 5 cities with a second one going into Surrey, and I won't belabor that. Next point. Innovative services. Once we have this infrastructure together, we can do pretty cool things, and I'm running out of time, and I want to get to the next. So next slide. In Metro Vancouver, how will this happen? Well, thanks to Barry and thanks to over the summer, we had a meeting of all the municipalities in Metro Vancouver and created a task force. So we had iCanada come and kind of help do that. It was a flashpoint for bringing everybody together, but we'd already started this over the summer. So it's intercity, and Vancouver is a bunch of small municipalities. It didn't aggregate like Toronto has. So that's got its own issues. So we have TransLink, the Transportation Authority, Hydro, Port of Vancouver, and all the municipalities. That's a member of the task force. So the vision is that every city, or at least 4 of them right now, such as New West, Coquitlam, Richmond, and Vancouver, are building out municipal fiber infrastructure. But the problem is that how do you get out of town? So you can build this fiber infrastructure that's ubiquitous, say, within a city, but there's no way to get from city to city that's within the region. So we need to somehow get from these aggregation points within the cities, across cities. Those black lines are municipal interconnects, so we have New West and Coquitlam bordered to each other. They could have a bilateral connection to each other. The red lines are where the Port of Vancouver or TransLink or Hydro could do the interconnects. So here's the vision for Metro Vancouver. 2 large internet exchange points, all the cities with municipal fiber infrastructure with aggregation points, and then TransLink or some other larger entity being the interconnect for all of those. So theoretically, any site and any municipality could connect to any others with dark fiber, right, or some other high-speed service. Be guaranteed in Vancouver to do this. We'd have infrastructure second to none as a result. Next slide. So how it can work? One agency could coordinate all the municipal interconnects. This is tough to do right now. It could be TransLink. It could be Metro Vancouver, the GVRD. We're not quite sure. We need some way to fulfill that type of interconnection from city to city. The important point is that the service provider will own the customer. So the service provider would fulfill the order for the fiber optic cable that goes end to end across all these municipalities, across a third party. But the service provider is where the innovation and the customer interaction happens. By the way, the customer in this particular case can have many different service providers, so they're not locked into one. They have a common infrastructure that gets to them. They can get to many different service providers. That's the benefit of the exchange points. Regional use case, we've got many. TransLink has to hook together all its bus depots, maintenance yards. If you want to do a smart traffic system, you need the roads to be instrumented correctly. ECOM, all the emergency responders needed. These are the people that are at the meetings that we're talking to. BCNet, higher ed and research, we obviously need it. Libraries, regional districts for utility systems. The port has mentioned it needs it, and Hydro also needs it to interconnect its substations. By the way, I haven't even, in terms of private use case, internet service providers, cloud service providers, the usual suspects. Finally, within the municipalities, the city departments and the schools all need this cabling infrastructure. Our big issue is that Vancouver is decentralized, and so trying to bring all these municipalities together in one, in terms of one organization, is difficult. There's lack of standards in how we do conduit, putting in conduit with highways and streets, and then how do we put in the fiber optic cable? How do we interconnect those things? The rights of way are hodgepodge. Again, another problem to solve. I think it's as Robin says, when we build a pipeline, let's put the conduit in and let's get the rights of way straightened out and opened up. And finally, return on investment and business case has to be done, although we're quite confident that that exists. Next step, regional task force formed, regular meetings. And the big thing that I think Barry can attest to this, is at the first set of meetings, everybody pulled out their fiber maps across Vancouver. So there were giant, I hate to say it, pieces of paper all over tables trying to figure out where all the fiber infrastructure across the cities were located. Then, once you have that, can you actually develop swap agreements from municipality to municipality? Those things are not in play right now, so there's no way to figure out how you can get from one city to the other. Finally, how can you get all these cities and this municipal infrastructure tied into the major exchange point at Harbor Center? That hasn't been done yet. So we have some very practical things. So again, this talk's a little short on vision and more on mechanics, on how do we get this thing done. But what I'm trying to impress you with is that trying to get next generation infrastructure into Metro Vancouver, it is not a solved problem. It's difficult, and we really don't know what the right way is to do it yet. Thanks.
I think the point that you may have picked up from the previous two speakers, and you'll hear more about it this afternoon when Jim Roche from Canary speaks, Darren Graham from Orion speaks. We have tremendous pieces of infrastructure across Canada. Australia decided to wire up the country, fiber it up, and set up a budget of $43 billion to do it, digging fiber everywhere. The fact is, we have a lot of the pieces. And as Mike just said, and it's come up before, what we have to do is get all the key players together and say, how do we leverage all of that? And we can leverage it.